Strothman Strategic Advisory Services Roundtable Series. Today is February 11th, 2021, and today our topic is international trade and how it fits for you and what you can do with it. So with me today, I'm very fortunate to have three experts in international trade. Joining us from Valvoline is Chuck Fisk. Chuck is a customs broker for the last 34 years. He was with Valvoline in their global trade compliance area and is the chair for the Kentucky and Southern Indiana District Export Council. Joining us also is Ed Webb. Ed is a former chair and CEO of the Kentucky World Trade Center, and he was that for 11 years, and now is the CEO of the World Trade Center in New Orleans, and he's joining us from hopefully warmer New Orleans than it is here today. And finally, we have a very distinguished guest whose credentials are far too long and too deep for us to discuss here today. But Robert Brown is chair of the National District Export Council, former chair of the Kentucky World Trade Center. He has degrees that are in multiplicity. He has an MBA, an MS in urban economics. He has a CPA. He has his PhD, and just tremendous experience in international affairs and a deep background. Oh, yes, and he is an attorney on top of all of that. So with that, I'd like to welcome you to the roundtable. And does anybody have anything that they'd like to, any remarks they'd like to open up with?
Well, if you don't mind, let me share an experience. Yesterday, I had to drive into the office, even with all the ice. And within half a mile of leaving home, and just as I'm getting on the ramp to get on the expressway, my windshield freezes over, and I can't see a single thing. And I started thinking that's sort of an analogy for those who are listening to this show. You know where you want to go. You want to increase your sales, but how are you going to get there? And you're trying to see through the haze of all the choices that you have. How do I get there? So I think that's what the three of us are here. So I'll mention, for instance, with the U.S. Department of Commerce. It's amazing. Someone can say, I got a really neat product. I'm doing okay, or maybe my sales are beginning to stagnate a little bit. I need to do something about the sales. Well, and you don't know where to go. Well, all the hundreds of countries around the world, where can I sell my product? So you go to the Department of Commerce. They have a Gold Key service. You sign up with them. They will identify and research for you where your product is likely to be exportable. And then, best of all, they will then introduce you to a U.S. Department of Commerce official in those countries, because each country around the world has a Department of Commerce employee whose job it is to help American companies export their products. And not only that, but if you want to come over and meet with potential customers, even for translation services, they will set up the meeting for you. They will arrange a conference room for you, and they will even provide a translator, make sure that everything goes okay. They also have some phenomenal trade missions, depending on the product category. And you can join one of these missions, and that's really impressive, a great way to start it, because you go over not as yourself with a small, medium-sized company, you go on with a delegation from the U.S. government. And so later, when you want to go back on your own, people pay a lot more attention to you. So the good news is there are organizations out there who can help, even small and medium-sized. So, Chuck, if you want to talk about what wonderful KDEC, what they offer to help small and medium-sized companies. You're on mute.
Chuck, you have to unmute.
Okay. Yes, I'd be delighted to. So the website you want to look at is, if you're in Kentucky or in Southern Indiana, is KentuckyExport.com. Now, if you go to that website, even if you're not in those jurisdictions, you can still get linked to the U.S. Department of Commerce, the Gold Key service that Robert was discussing. And it is just as he said. These people, this is your government at work to help you increase your sales, and they will do what he said. They will not only take you under their wing, they will introduce you. And if you go on an overseas delegation, they go with you. They basically roll out the red carpet for you to introduce you to the customers that you want to meet, the potential customers you want to meet. So The District Export Council, there's one in every state, and you can certainly find the one in your jurisdiction. Or if you want to come and look at my webpage, KentuckyExport.com, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay. Well, Chuck, thank you for that. I do, as Robert was alluding to, driving down that icy road and trying to figure out how you're going to get there and where you're going. The most important thing is to figure out where you're coming from. What's your starting point? Where is the road going to, and where's it originating from? So when I think about that, I look back, and you've been in this for 34 years. You have a lot of experience. I want to figure out if we can help our listeners and the people watching this webinar get a baseline of where we're coming from. So maybe a little bit of background in terms of what do we have in free trade agreements now that they can start to look to take advantage of? Where have we been? And there's all this talk of everything changing in the USMCA and NAFTA. Perhaps you can give us a little bit of perspective and color on where we've been, where we are, and then we can start to talk about maybe where we're going to go.
Yeah, sure.
Hey,
So,
Matt, just if I may, can we fill out the picture? Because Ed didn't talk about World Trade Centers, and they provide awesome services to help you identify markets and what to do. And I think that's a critical part, and then we can go right directly into Chuck's.
Sure.
Robert, thank you for that. And Robert, it's always good to work with you and Chuck and Matt. Again, I appreciate this opportunity. Trade Center is basically a partnership with businesses in every different state. We have 300 locations headquartered out of New York City, but we are a trade center that works closely with the U.S. Commercial Services. In fact, they were the backbone of trade in this nation as far as working hand in hand because they provide the export direction. We handle both sides of the equation. What we do in Louisiana, which can be different state by state in terms of trade centers, how they operate, but we're focused on efficacy, both on a regional level in our state capital, Baton Rouge, and we make regular excursions to DC. And Robert, something near and dear to you and Chuck, any kind of policy issues that can impact businesses negatively, be it in our case, looking at energy issues right now for the state of Louisiana. Along with the connectivity, that's a key thing we do at the World Trade Centers. We meet people, put people together. Many times clients will come to us and say, I have a question, and we don't have all the answers, but we have the connection point. In many cases, Robert, we work together in Kentucky. We work together on getting you connected to someone that could help a business that the Trade Center could not manage. So we used our board and our clients or our investors as a resource for other investors. And we discovered that connectivity is probably the most great thing we do for our businesses. The education piece, we certainly handle that. Trade centers have an advisory piece where they bring in a third party to work with companies that can't have a full-time person on staff to help with their internal needs. Small to mid-sized companies, Matt, don't have the capacity. And that's one thing we worked on in Kentucky, we're working on here, to build that capacity through the World Trade Centers and or through the U.S. Commercial Services to know they've got that resource. So if you will, we in effect work hand in hand with U.S. Commercial Services. We take both sides of the trade equation. They have wonderful resources that we refer and use. And we do the same thing with our businesses. We create our own product here that we think will fit that individual market.
Yeah, and I think that's terrific because small and mid-sized companies don't have the resources, and they do need assistance. They do need help. They do need some place to go that has the information, the experience, and can shepherd them through step by step on what they need to do. And clearly the interests are aligned because the more that you can bring this type of economic activity into a state, the better the state is, the better the business is. So everybody wins on the same side. And so I think that's important. So the World Trade Centers are tremendously important. KDEC and the other resources also are terrifically important. And we'll go a little bit more into that towards the end of the presentation, where we'll get a little bit more about a tutorial of where do they go, how can they get started with this. And again, I'll go back to the other point, which is in getting started, where are we coming from? Many small businesses, they think about international trade and their first thought is, well, that's bigger than me. I can't do anything. But there's two sides to international trade. There's the coming and there's the going. And clearly supply chains from international are important because it could create margins in businesses where they can procure and buy less expensively and get better supply chains going. On the other side of it, it can potentially be a revenue generator as you find new customers beyond your borders and expand, particularly with the technological revolution that's gone on in the last few years and most acutely in the last year. Technology allows us to get ourselves in front of people at further and further distances, evidenced by this call alone, where four of us are sitting in four different cities, all doing different things, but all together. So I'll go back to that, Chuck. As you look at it, perhaps a little background on where we were, how we've come to where we are, and then maybe we can all, Robert, you can help us at that point and take us to where you think we might be going.
Sure. So as we think about free trade agreements, this is the easiest, quickest way that an SME can play on the same field as the big corporations.
Because, an SME, tell me an SME.
Okay, small and medium-sized enterprise.
Okay.
So small and medium-sized enterprises don't necessarily have the people on staff, the resources, etc., to feel like they can play in the same arena as the large corporations. But you can, because there's no exclusion of this game. The only thing that excludes you is the correct preparation and the correct use of the free trade agreement. So let's jump back for a second. A few minutes ago, Matthew was talking about supply chain cost, and this is pivotal. If you're trying to export, or if you're importing product that you're gonna convert into a product you export, then you know about supply chain costs. So a free trade agreement and the correct usage of the intelligent use of the supply chain will help you be more competitive. It's a sustainable competitive advantage.
Thank you for the discussion on the World Trade Centers, and I think that's an important resource that we all have, and it's critical because many small companies don't know where to go and how to get resources, and international trade runs both directions. It can run in and it can run out. So, for example, if you're looking to gain efficiencies in your supply chain, you're going to want to import from overseas, and you're going to need to know how to navigate that and what's available to you. And organizations like the World Trade Center and KDEC, they're available to walk you through hand in hand and take you through these processes, which is tremendous because it benefits both the states and the businesses. So the interests are totally aligned, and that's why it's a great resource for people, and they can feel comfortable going there and looking at it because it's a win-win. Chuck, my question for you would be, as Robert alluded to with the car on the ice, if you don't know where you're coming from, you're probably not going to get to where you're going to. And so it would be great for everybody to have a perspective of where have we been in terms of these free trade agreements? Where are we now currently? There's a lot of conversation about the issues that are coming about with the change in administration, which I think that Robert can help us answer afterwards as to about what to expect. But for now, can you give us some background and perspective based on your experience of the evolution, where we are, and how these small businesses can work within this arena, that you don't have to be a Valvoline or a size of a Valvoline to be able to work in this international marketplace?
Yes, exactly. So as an SME, you want some easy bolt-on solutions. You want people to help you come alongside you. And as Matthew was saying, the resources available, the KDEX, the World Trade. Once you decide where you want to go, and so back to Robert's analogy, you can't see where you're going. So maybe this in the analogy, the DEC or the World Trade is the one who's calling out to you saying, hey, slow down, turn left, turn right, whatever. They're helping you navigate this unfamiliar territory. One thing you want to think about is utilizing a free trade agreement, and there are many. So, and I've been working with them for years. Let's start with the one that most people have heard of, the USMCA replacing the NAFTA. So why replace the NAFTA? Wasn't it great? Well, some people thought so, some people didn't. I think ultimately the reason that Trump wanted to replace it with the USMCA was to close some loopholes that were in the NAFTA that became much more apparent as time went on. So initially, the idea of free trade with Canada and Mexico, no problem, great idea. However, Mexico got really good at this. And if you've ever heard of a maquiladora factory, or sometimes called Imex factory, this is a concept that started back in the 1950s, predated the FTAs. But the idea was that foreign investors would provide the overhead and the material, and Mexico would provide the labor. And Mexico has a large population of 18 to 24-year-olds who need jobs. So, and this started in the border zone in northern Mexico back in the 50s and expanded countrywide until when I stopped working with them back in 15, there were almost 800 of them throughout Mexico. And each of them becoming very good at producing product that would be duty-free into the United States. So a quick example. One that I've heard of is a maquiladora would import from China LCD screens, the kind that go in the dashboard of your car, and they come into Mexico in this duty-free status where they come into Mexico but they don't stay. They go into the maquiladora or the MX factory. They're converted into a dashboard for an automobile. The LCD screen starts in Chapter 85 of the tariff. As it's converted into the dashboard of the automobile, it becomes a Chapter 87 article. And this is tariff shift, and this is pivotal to many, many free trade agreements. If you can show a tariff shift, then you have a qualified product. Now, what does that mean? That means that the dashboard is now a product of Mexico, even though most of the value is Far East. It's the LCD screen. Then this dashboard might further become a part of a complete automobile, also in Chapter 87. And then this Chapter 87 automobile is exported out of Mexico into the U.S., sold in Mexico duty-free or at a reduced duty rate. And this is controlling the cost in the supply chain. And this is the loophole that was exploited for years legally by almost 800 factories in Mexico. So this, I think, was the ultimate reason for the change from the NAFTA to the USMCA. There were others, but this was the real killer, I think, in Donald Trump's eyes. Now, back to you, the SME. How do you utilize the advantages of an FTA? Well, it's very fact specific. And so what you want to do is you want to, either get on the phone with Ed or, go to my website, KentuckyExport.com, or you want to talk with Robert or someone like this to help you navigate this. Because what you are manufacturing, what you are doing, where you are sending it, these are all going to determine which free trade agreements you can use or not use and how you can use them. It's very fact specific. So it goes beyond a discussion like this. But reach out to the resources that are available to you, and you can play in the same arena as the big guys.
So this tariff shifting is critical because these trade agreements are very deep and very detailed. And one of the big things for Trump, I guess, was that China was able to still export into the U.S., but through a neighbor versus directly, is what the crux of the matter was. And that allowed, and that became good for us in some ways because theoretically the consumer prices should be lower, but it also hurts our domestic manufacturers. Is that right?
Yeah. So the people who did these things that were now being done in Mexico were unemployed. So the U.S. jobs did move to Mexico. Those manufacturing jobs migrated south to Mexico. And the people who do those jobs are American voters. So that's, the rest.
Right.
But, yeah. So that's why it resonated with so many people and still does, for good reasons. Ultimately, corporations don't really care. Corporations care about cost of production. Corporations care about profits. And both of those things increased using the NAFTA when used correctly. So, back to my more important point is these advantages, these strategic competitive advantages are available to everyone as long as they utilize the resources available to them. And that's really literally a phone call or a key click away.
And there are still many of these advantages available. The USCMA did not eliminate them all.
Oh, correct. I could, depending on where you want to ship to, or where you ship to, the customer base that you have. There's the USMCA. There's the CAFTA, which is the Central American Free Trade Agreement. It's very similar to the old NAFTA. It's a little bit more difficult to qualify for. There's the US-Korea Free Trade Agreement. And I utilize these things on a daily basis. It's been some years, but I've also used the US-Israeli Free Trade Agreement. And I'm familiar with some others, the chief among which is called ASEAN, which is a little different. It's more based in value and doesn't care so much about tariff transformation. But, in any of these cases, as I said, very fact specific, discuss this, with one of the people on the panel or someone like them, and see what you can do. It's actually a small investment for a huge payoff.
Right. And before I go to Robert, I want to ask you a quick question on that's for things coming in here where you can get them to your advantage. I imagine it works the same way on the outbound so that you're not hit with tariffs on the outbound and can be competitive. Is that right?
Yeah. So on the outbound, not only have you saved money in your cost of production on the inbound, so you have a lower, a lower cost base and maybe a lower purchase price, making you more competitive against your competitors. But then when you utilize the free trade agreements, or you discuss this with your customer and then they utilize them, then they save the customs duties, which might accrue at the destination. Again, making your product less expensive and more competitive. So it really is a win-win for everyone. The only ones that lose when you use an FTA is the governments, and they don't need the money anyway.
Hey, Matt, can I jump in real quick here, Chuck? Just a real quick question for you, and I hold that thought. But let me ask you about the USMCA. What I believe, and we discovered here at the Trade Center, was that the changes you mentioned were important in terms of NAFTA to USMCA. But don't you think that one of the biggest lessons learned from they modified that to a new model was being more people-centric versus industry? Some of the complaints that I had from businesses were that they felt like the administration was focusing more on profitability and maybe the agricultural sector, but not really looking at the people in the particular industry itself. They weren't people-centric. And I'm not saying they're softening, but I think they're getting broader in their approach about how they're going to look at how these agreements impact not just that particular economy, but the people of that economy. Do you agree with that? Disagree with that?
Yeah, and I can kind of add a little color to it as well. So you might be talking about the milk issues up in Quebec, and those were, as you said, there were people whose industries were actually being gutted because of non-tariff barriers to trade that normally should be they shouldn't be able to continue when a free trade agreement is in place. However, there were some ways that they kept them in place, and there are some remedies under the NAFTA that weren't working well. So, as you said, the lessons learned from the NAFTA were incorporated into the USMCA, and this is basically in dispute negotiating resolutions to dispute remediations, based on non-tariff barriers to trade, and the appointment of certain arbitrators. Who gets to appoint the arbitrators, and these are all very important things and very specific to specific industries. for the SMEs that we're discussing, if anyone is in the milk and the dairy industry, they're very familiar with this. Most of the people affected are on the northern border and trying to sell their product into Canada. There are other examples as well, but that's the one that really stood out. It's the one that generated most press.
Robert?
Yeah.
So I want to emphasize a couple of things. And Matt, do you want me to shift over and talk about trade policy as well?
Yeah, I think this is a great conversation, and as you give your input into this part of it, take us into that's where we've been, but we have a new administration. There's a lot of noise around this. I don't think anybody really knows exactly what they're going to do, but there's a lot of indications, and I'd be interested in your perspective on what can we expect from this administration as we go forward, including your input into the last part.
It's going to be a very different philosophy about the role of the United States in the world, and in particular on trade. Let me just, as background, review key points from the previous administration. So it was very much of a withdrawal and disengagement. He had withdrawn from the Barack Obama administration's Trans-Pacific Partnership, which I thought was a terrible mistake because it was anti-China, and we was getting all the other major countries in Asia to work together to sort of regulate how China was doing business. He also crippled the World Trade Organization by blocking appointments and threatening withdrawal. He is also very keen on renegotiation. I think for me and for most people who have studied the two agreements, NAFTA was not a great agreement for the United States. It was not fair. It did not give the United States access to exports to Canada in particular, not just milk, but also beef. And so the new one is a much stronger agreement. And he had also negotiated with more of a hammer than a fine piece of negotiation skill, the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement. Tariffs. He wanted broad tariffs on the steel and aluminum from around the world, including Canada. As we all know, we had a China trade war and lots of conflicts there. But looking under Biden during his administration, it's going to be very much of a different philosophy. One element that's really critical for him is that he talks about the foreign policy for the middle class. And I think this is really important. In particular, his candidate for national security advisor has emphasized that we cannot rely on tariffs to solve the U.S. Problems with the businesses and how they're able to compete. We need to go deeper than just looking at the ability to have tariffs to keep out one. So what they're going to be looking at is reviving the domestic industry. They've got a $400 billion plan for Buy America, $300 billion plan for clean energy. But it's starting with the country and the businesses in the United States. How can we make them stronger, more able to compete around the world? I think that's the right solution, looking for the cure versus, all right, you've got it and you're hobbling along, so we'll give you crutches to survive. Now, that's not going to be the way to make us more of an important player. So where does that mean? Several things that we're going to be watching. The first one is there's upcoming agreements with Kenya at a free trade agreement that I think he'll be focusing on. And if that goes through, that will lead for opportunities in Africa. But that's not just one country. The Obama administration and Biden as well have put emphasis on improving trade relations with Africa. And after all, those are the fastest growing economies in the world now, no longer in Asia. And so if you've been thinking about where can I do business, think Asia, but also certainly Africa, because those are much faster growing opportunities. Beyond that, there's a number of other important ones. We have Trade Promotion Authority, which allows the president to negotiate agreements and requires Congress to vote yes or no, not to strike sentences or words in the agreement. And that's been a critical part for the United States negotiations. That's going to be coming up for renewal this summer, and that's going to be an important one. Another big one is the new director of the World Trade Organization. Most of the trading partners for the United States are favoring the Nigerian foreign minister, which people think, oh, no, really? How's that going to help the United States? Just a small country ganging up on the United States. But in fact, she's a naturalized U.S. citizen. So I would have thought, what better opportunity to appoint someone. And the United Kingdom that's going to be a really important series of negotiations because as they are drifting apart from Europe, they are encountering problems. I just saw yesterday that Amsterdam became the largest stock market in Europe, surpassing London. And so they have some other issues that are going to be coming up. So I think there's a real opportunity for the United States to step in. In terms of industries, as I emphasized, it's going to be less emphasis on tariffs. So if you're struggling, steel industry, et cetera, I think it's going to be more difficult for you to obtain some support. However, tariffs tend to be adopted for industries that are concentrated in what we call swing states. Certainly, Michigan and Pennsylvania, Ohio are swing states, as we know. So, notwithstanding all the other rhetoric, when it comes down to actually implementing protection for key industries that we may see Biden actually go into it. Petroleum, as we know, if you're instead of being an exporter of oil, you might want to think about being an importer because we're no longer be self-sufficient in oil and petroleum. We're going to have to be importing it, so there'll be real opportunities for us. So I think those are the key ones, and I think also the relationship with China over time will improve. So if your partner is or you're doing a lot of business in China or with China, I think there will be opportunities. However, most companies that I've been talking to, and I'd be curious what Ed and Chuck think, are not going to be as dependent on a single sourcing in China. They'll be looking at multiple sourcing. So those are my observations.
Okay, I've got a couple of quick follow-up questions for you on some of the things that you mentioned. One of them being Africa as a primary target for a fast-growing economy, and when you look at it, Nigeria in particular, you've mentioned. Nigeria has a reputation as one of the largest scam countries because a lot comes out of there, a lot of lack of controls. People are afraid of Africa a little bit because of the instability that it's had over the years. Where would you be targeting in Africa, and where is there stabilization there, enough stabilization to be able to protect from the risk of it?
It's interesting. Several years ago, when I heard people talking about Africa, that was my perception, man. It's like, come on, we all get scam and solicitations from Nigeria, and heavens forbid, when are we going to catch on and realize that that's not where we want to be? But again, the fastest growing economies in the world are in Africa, and the largest one is Nigeria, and the biggest one for opportunities for U.S. companies, Nigeria, Kenya, certainly South Africa as well. But you don't need to make that decision. You can go to U.S. Department of Commerce, and U.S. Department of Commerce will do all the things that we've been talking about before under their Gold Key service. And the beauty of it is, for instance, for signing for a small company, $950 to have them identify 5 potential partners for you in a foreign market. And not only to identify the matching firms, but they will provide your information to them and do the matchmaking for you. They'll give you profiles and they'll attend appointments, provide reports, et cetera. So $950 to find new businesses. So great. It's fascinating to talk about where should I be doing business, but it's too specific to sort of discuss. Get experts, and that's what Department of Commerce and KDAC and World Trade Centers will do for you.
That's a tremendous insight. A couple of things you mentioned also, and 2 in particular I want to key in on, and I want to do it in this order. The first one is steel, and as you probably are aware, steel right now is in an absolute turmoil as a market. The prices are just doing nothing but rising every day. We have a severe demand oversupply issue, and the mills don't have it. They can't produce it. And what does that say for us going forward in terms of steel and being able to supply domestically for what we need and having these mills ramp back up?
Oh, I'm always thinking about not the next thing, but the next thing. So personally, I'm less persuaded about what the market is doing today. What I would be more interested in, what is it going to be doing in a year or 2 years from now? Because, for instance, in the steel, it takes you that long to ramp up and open up blast furnaces, mills, etc. If I had investment money, it wouldn't be going into refurbishing or expanding steel production, because I think the long term, what has supported the steel industry has been U.S. tariffs, and I don't think that that's going to help in the long term for the U.S. economy. I once did a research project trying to identify under the Reagan administration, he imposed some supports for U.S. steel. And so I did a lot of research trying to figure out not so much what it did for the U.S. steel, but what did it do for U.S. automobile companies? So I had these magnificent ideas. It was going to tremendously increase the cost of an automobile. And by my calculations, it increased the cost of automobiles by $5. And I thought, shoot, there goes my Nobel Prize for economic research.
Do something else.
But then the more I thought about it, that year we had 10 million cars produced. And that would have been $50 million that it cost the U.S. automobile industry. That year, they lost more than $50 million. So it converted a profitable industry into a losing industry, which would have raised their cost of raising funds on the market and at the bank. So yes, it did have an impact. So those are the types of things that we need to consider, and we'll see what the Trump does.
Hey, Matt, can I jump in real quick here?
Yeah, because I was going to go to you right now for it.
Second, something Robert said that people, it's kind of the tough reality of tough love. The idea of getting back the U.S. revisiting itself heavily in steel is Pollyannish. And Robert's exactly right, and Chuck, you know this. Those mills that sat idle for years, they kept a few of those in a warming mode, much like an oven, in the event they ever could come back online again. We had a number of companies in Kentucky that actually did that. They went to the old steel mills and basically kept them warm. So in the event steel ever came back, it hasn't come back. Realistically, the U.S. doesn't want to be in the steel business because of the labor costs and the pollution costs of creating the product. I think there might be boutique opportunities, perhaps in steel, maybe with aluminum. But if you notice this, and I would ask Robert and Chuck to make comment about this, this administration is very carefully dealing with the China tariffs. In fact, if not pulled back any of the tariffs on the steel or aluminum that's been imposed on China. So does that lead us to say, well, then we're going to reopen those mills in the U.S.? I'm with Robert. No, I don't see it happening. I see this all part of a bigger chess game being played out, where eventually we'll be able to agree on certain terms with our biggest playing nation, our partner in China. So, Robert, thank you for that statement. I agree with what you're referring to there. I think that's an idea that we talk about bringing those up or bringing those jobs back to the U.S. and steel business. I don't see it happening.
And that's a tricky piece. What do you think, Chuck?
Yeah, two things occur to me, and this is not to discount anything you've said, Ed, but the political situation first, which you can fill in the blanks there, but then the strategic issues surrounding steel production. So this is sort of a tightrope that Biden and others will have to walk to determine how much, what is that sweet spot in terms of support given to the steel industry or not. The market, sometimes we look at the world market and it provides certain parameters. However, the strategic issues surrounding having our own production, we learned this in spades when we tried to get PPE, right? And so let's learn that lesson and remember it. It's not an easy fix, though, is it?
No, it's not. That's a great point, and you're not discounting. You're, if anything, amplifying that the belief that there are probably other things we can pursue as a country and more important than just looking at the steel issue right now. So,
and Matt, that's a perfect point, Ed, because to your point, I do believe that Biden is tiptoeing through the garden on these policies, trying to figure out how to thread that needle. And to Chuck's point, it's a tricky balance. Now, you take a look at the next thing that Robert mentioned, which is energy, and that you might be looking at importing energy. But Ed, you're sitting in New Orleans. It's the Gulf states. It's high energy production. We're talking about the Green New Deal and all the rest of this stuff. And we've been energy sufficient and a surplus energy country for a few years now. And we're now talking about importing energy again because of Biden and some of these policies there. The question is very much what Chuck was saying. It's a fine, tricky balance between where do you go, because the ultimate hidden tax in this country, whether you go to EVs or not, is still energy. Energy is an enormous, crippling tax on everything. And you take the consumer who's riding around at $1.98 to $2.15 a gallon, which in 1973 terms is probably equivalent to about 15 cents a gallon. But you look at what happens when it goes to $3 and $4. A lot of things seize up in an economy that's built on 70% consumerism. So the question becomes, where are we going with that? Ed, what are you seeing in your own area, sitting right on, besides the fact that you're in the middle of 2 hurricanes in the last 6 months, and which nobody can control, and then you have, the third one coming, which can be controlled, which is political policy. How does your region react? What are you seeing? What do you think? What's happening out there?
Matt, thanks for that question. And actually, by the way, since I've been here, I've had 7 hurricanes since I've arrived here. So it's like Hurricane Alley with Ed's arrival. But thank you for that question. We've got a situation now in our state where a Democratic governor is really at odds with this current administration, particularly on his policy toward energy business. And we are truly still an energy state. On the export side, we are big in agriculture. In fact, soybeans is one of our top export products to China, who goes back and forth between China and Mexico being our top export players. But on the export side, on the energy side, we're very concerned because we're not yet to the point where we're doing a good job of carbon capture. We're looking at hydrogen as a resource. We're not quite there yet in the U.S. And those oil rigs in the Gulf and throughout the state provide tens of thousands of jobs for our economy here, and dollars going back into the government, back to the people who make those jobs or make those industries possible. We are quite candidly, with a big question mark, we're in DC voicing concerns, saying, where do you really stand on this thing? It's back to a point you just made to try, like I said, there's just a tiptoeing. And that's a great phrase, because that's exactly what this administration is doing. Again, he's not pulled back on his tariff issues. In fact, he's been focusing heavily on COVID, which he should do, no doubt about that. But as far as fossil fuels and the like, this state is not ready to pull that cord, that life cord, and found the next best opportunity. It's not just this state; it's this region that it depends upon the energy business itself. And Robert, something you said that about what this our past president had done, or what our current president's going to get us back into. Remember, I discussed a long time about the Paris Climate Agreement, which we removed ourselves from. It was 2015, got into it through another president. We removed ourselves in 2017, and now we're going to get right back into that agreement, which means, Matt, for the U.S., that agreement has what they call a global stock take, which once you sign into it, you've got to set certain parameters and certain goalposts every year with the emissions and making sure you're following through. So fast forward to Louisiana and the Gulf Coast region, we're not sure how we're going to do that. So we're trying to adjust, figure out really what does this administration plan to do about energy, and are they really going to stop the fracking? Are they really going to hold back on oil leases, which they've already said they're going to be doing here? So you've got a lot of concerned folks here that are looking at our state saying, you're taking our number one primary, if you will, aside from the agricultural piece and soybean, out of our pocket. How can we recover? And it's not just Louisiana, it's all those energy states, including Texas.
That's a lot in that statement. And energy, as we know, is a core cornerstone of our economy. And it's a cornerstone both in production and revenue generation. And it's a cornerstone in terms of consumption of resources and capital going out. So there's a lot to be said. And with that, given that, Robert, and given everything that's been discussed here, how do you see things shaking out over the next 3 to 5 years in terms of a small to medium-sized enterprise being able to position themselves to be effective in the international markets, to navigate what certainly seems to be some turbulent waters ahead, compounded on fiscal policy of interest rates and certainly taxes heading the other direction when we get out of this thing. So, with all of that cross currents, how do you see it for a small to medium sized enterprise? How did they get themselves to the place where this international position could almost be a life preserver for them in many ways beyond the domestic markets?
If I may, imagine two markets: Market U and Market R. Market U is the United States. Market R is the rest of the world. Market R has over 90% of the disposable income in the middle class, and Market A has less than 10% of it. Market R has very few competition for U.S. companies with their expertise and their skills. Market A, you're wherever you are, Louisville, Lexington, or wherever you are, you're surrounded by small and medium-sized companies who are competing with you every single day. Now, where would you like to compete? Faster growing, with less competition with your skills and expertise, or stay where you are in a slower growth and try to manage to survive? Now, imagine this. Suppose I can get you into Market R with the U.S. government paying for your trip to go to the Market R and do the research. And I can provide you with the research to get into Market R at $950. Wow, what a bargain. And U.S. Department of Commerce, they have an award program, grants that come out every year. And usually they don't give money, all of it away, because not enough U.S. companies apply for it. You can get grants to go overseas and do research or join trade missions or whatever you may want to. And so magnificent opportunities. A lot of things are uncertain in life, but this one is an easy one for me. The best opportunities for even small and medium-sized company is go where the growth is, go where someone is going to pay you to do the research and to pay for you to travel at their expense, U.S. government expense. So, Ed, I'm sure you've been watching those grants.
STEP grants, yes, indeed, my friend, very much.
So that's one key way to take advantage of the situation, take advantage of these conditions. So Ed and Chuck and Robert, where would people begin the process of looking for those resources? Because as you're speaking about these grants, I have clients that generally are regional here, but have opportunities to import from overseas and find partners, or even to export out of market, but have never explored it because they don't know where to begin. What are in combination? That's how you take advantage of the situation, by finding the guide, if you will, the proper guide, which is your organizations. But besides the $950 great resource, what other resources are available to people to be able to help us in the small business world get to where we have to go and become, maybe instead of an SME, an ME?
That's
so we can grow up a little bit.
It's a fair question, man. You know what I would do, and I certainly want Chuck and Robert to chime right in. Robert's referring to the State Trade Expansion Program, the STEP grant, which is, Robert, thanks for mentioning that. It's been around for 10 years now or less. And small businesses that want to export can qualify for up to $5,000 or $6,000 non-match, as long as it's an export-related opportunity. And that's a huge program, man. And Robert made a great point. People don't apply for it enough because most states have a surplus at year's end. So it provides a challenge for them as they reapply for more money the following year. So Robert had mentioned the STEP grant, which is a great program to mention that's available through the SBA. But I was going to say, Robert, one thing we talked about in Chuck that the small to mid-sized businesses should look into is, I would definitely say, work with your state economic development team there, because many times they're going to be focused on all their businesses in that given state. And in Kentucky, it's the Kentucky Cabinet. And in Louisiana, it's the Louisiana Economic Development. make that phone call. Pick up your cell phone, go to the internet, and see what they've got available for mid to small size companies. Plus, reach out to the Small Business Association. They're behind the STEP grant, and they sometimes go unnoticed, but it's a great resource. Chuck?
Yeah, so the other thing that occurs to me is if I'm an SME and I'm considering getting into the export game, or I'm expanding to a different place I've never shipped to before, the question of will I get paid? The question of will I get paid? Will I get paid timely? I've never done business with these people before. So the answer to this is the Ex-Im Bank, and this is easily researched. You just go to the same websites we've been talking about, the U.S. Commercial Service. We'll link you over to the Ex-Im Bank. They will basically underwrite the receivable that you're expecting, so that you will get paid, and it's guaranteed by the U.S. government. So don't let that stop you. We've presented to you a wide range of things to research and options that'll help you, and they're all basically either free or very low cost. So there's really no excuse. Get out there, contact us, contact people like us, start the ball rolling. Doesn't have to happen in a week, but you'll be better off once you start that ball rolling.
And I think that's powerful, and the takeaway is the World Trade Organizations in your state are a great place to start. The District Export Council is great. KentuckyExport.com is a great place to start. The U.S. Commerce Department, any of these places can help you get to where you are, but you need somebody to take you through. As they say, don't try this at home. This is for professionals. They can lead you through, shorten your pain cycle. And with that, I think this has been very, very instructive. I've learned some things. It's been a great perspective. I want to thank Robert Brown, Chuck Fisk, and Ed Webb for being my guest today. This has it's been a really great conversation. It's great to see you all again, and I want to thank you all for participating. Your contact information will be on the credits after this. They can reach out directly to you and answer any questions they may have. So with that, thank you very much. Have a great day. Stay safe.